go back to your childhood, growing up. Where'd you reside? Where were you residing at that age?
London. East Dulwich.
East Dulwich.
Yeah, and not the East Dulwich that people know now. I mean, this was like... East Dulwich, when I was growing up, was a working class area. I mean, on the main road, Lordship Lane, you know, there's like coffee houses and bistros and delis and stuff, and quaint little pub bars.
Dead groovy, yeah.
But back then, it was a thing of like where there's a couple of pubs on, like, they're kind of like middle class pubs now, or you know, but back then it's like if you didn't know people, you wouldn't go in there. Exactly, because they were just like no-go areas unless you knew the people in there. I mean, just off...
locals only kind of vibe.
Yeah, definitely. Because I remember, like, in the summer, like, when I was about 14, going into a pub just off in East Dulwich, just off the main road. And at the back, they had, like, a boxing ring, and these geezers did, like, bare-knuckle fighting.
What?
So, you know, that's what East Dulwich was like. Even though it was like that, it had like that hardcore working class element, you still had a mix of like English, African, Afro-Caribbean, you know, a few Asians. You know, it's like a good mix of people.
Yeah. The landscape was obviously a lot different, and compared to some of the people that I've had on the show, which in fairness have lent by demographic, geographic of where I am, is being West London writers, old school, you know, Power Square, Ladbroke Grove, you know, that flyover, etc. But you, although you were southeast, you did travel, and that's what I found in, you know, looking deeper into your kind of history. You weren't actually afraid to step into any zone and do what you do. I mean, you know, do you know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, because it was for me, it was about being true to the culture, being true to aerosol writing. I mean, so I remember, I think it was reading, Watching My Name Go By, where that just like really opened my mind. I mean, Subway Out was good for the visuals, but Watching My Name Go By was good for the mental. It gave much more of a deeper insight into it.
Did it give you context? I mean, even by the name alone, that's like, okay, right.
It did, because it basically went into the motivation of writers, and also there was that whole thing of writers never being limited by geographical location. And you had some affiliating with gangs or writing gang names and stuff like that. But also Getting Up as well, Subway Graffiti in New York. Yeah. That was a huge inspiration for me.
Yeah.
I think more so than Watching My Name Go By. But it was that whole thing of writers not being limited by geographical location. And because, as in itself, there was that concept of going all city, me and the guys that I used to write with, we went all city. So, it wasn't a thing to go into another area and write our names. It was because, as far as we were concerned, we were writers, and that's what writers did. So,
but South, like you say, by default, Dulwich, Peckham, these areas back in the day, and hold tight all the crew that watched from them ends. It was hardcore back then.
Dulwich, no. I mean, it had its rough elements, but it was still calm, you know what I mean? But Peckham, Peckham's still rough around, even though it's been gentrified now, it's still rough around the edges. But, I mean, I mainly used to paint with a writer called Plaz, who went on to be one of the founding members of Tough Arts. And he lived on the North Peckham estate. So, and he told me about all the walls and stuff there. So we used to like go and paint there pretty much every week.
Yeah. These are the messages. I mean, I've had Mean on, of Scam, like, you know, your name, like, the all city approach, essentially, you know, the all city approach.
Yeah. And and with Peckham, it was like, but because I was like, people got to know me there, I could walk through Peckham at like by myself at 2-3 in the morning and
not big bothered.
Yeah, there was some scary characters, but I didn't get. I suppose that's the same thing with hip hop heads in the Bronx. Like I remember watching the film The Freshest Kids, and Mr. Freeze, you know, because it's like basically the only white guy around in hip hop. And the dark side of it, he was saying that because of who he was, he could pretty much walk anywhere to any neighborhood and, there's Mr. Freeze. And, you know, he had that respect. And I think it was the same for people, I think in a lot of places. I suppose, like, for instance, if there were some writers that did want to paint South, like in Peckham, and now with me, they would have been safe, or if they were with players, they would have been safe. No one would touch them because of who they knew and who they were being associated with.
And I guess because you got the juice of being from a harder area, you know, to travel around, like you say, the Bronx, it's like, well, you're from the Bronx, you know, it's the Mecca and it's pretty gritty. So, you know, you can kind of hold your head in any kind of arena, can't you?
But it's funny because I kind of got that vibe from West London. I mean, I remember the first time I went to West London was like summer of '85. And you could tell there was a scene there. And I must admit, it did feel a bit intimidating for me as well, because it's like, well, yeah, I'm out here painting, but I don't know anyone here. So shit could kick off.
Yeah, totally. Who did you used to run with when you were coming over here? Did you used to come, you know, as a collective from the southeast? Were you on your own? You know, who was...
It was
85?
85, it would have been definitely the Supreme Team. I mean, that was a crew founded by Crash 185.
Yeah.
Clapham Sides writer. He was... Yeah. I mean, he was a big influence to me because... It's funny because, like, there used to be rap jams at Albany Theatre in Deptford every Sunday. And I used to see him there all the time, but I didn't know who he was. Yeah. And then I remember but he knew who I was, and we just used to, like, talk about music and stuff and writing. And then, I remember him saying, when I was writing my name, what, you're Crash? And I says, yeah, you know, I says, no.
That must have blown your mind.
It did, because I think I used to see his name everywhere. I mean, he was like one of the writers that inspired me to get up more, because he was just up in some of the most insane places.
How influential was the Albany Theatre era, you know, with the way hip-hop was coming into, like, our culture, and you having those opportunities to speak to people and meeting the hip-hop community firsthand? How were those jams like that back in the day?
It was a thing. I mean, it had like three aspects to it. I mean, on Saturdays you had Spats.
Of course.
That Westwood did.
The legendary Spats,
Then after that, people used to like go down to Covent Garden and hang out there.
Yeah.
And then on Sunday afternoons you had like Shore Theatre.
So this was like, I mean, it's actually hard to believe. I mean, that was almost like a glory day, like... Especially now in the environments that we're in, it's like to imagine like that level of repeated events and shows that were going on across a weekend. That's crazy.
But it was there was that, but it was more or less about. But having people from the States come over was kind of a bit sporadic. It was more or less about people over here from all aspects, kind of like doing what they loved and like,